Hello, coastal beekeepers. This is Jeff Harris, your University Extension Apiculture Specialist. I'm sorry that we can't meet face to face this year. Hopefully things will get back to normal by midsummer. Maybe we can start seeing each other at either workshops or seminars on beekeeping. I certainly have missed doing a lot of that this last year. Zoom meetings are okay, but certainly face to face and standing around with people at beehives and going through beehives and talking about issues is a lot more fun and meaningful to me anyway, in a hands-on way. If you attended this meeting last year, you know that I did not attend. I had a conflict, and so I had sent Audrey Sheridan, my research associate, to substitute for me. And so I'm not exactly sure what she covered. So what I'm going to do is just resume sort of the pattern that I usually do at these meetings. And what I try and do is present sort of national or regional news that might be of interest to beekeepers, and then just tell you a little bit about what MSU Agriculture has been doing for the year, and then just offer my contact information so that you can basically reach me directly with your thoughts and concerns about how MSU Agriculture can help you with your needs in the near future. So just to start with, most of us who are in beekeeping Mississippi know that most of our commercial beekeepers earn most of their money comes from honey production. Uh, another area in which they make a lot of money is also the selling of starter colonies, nukes, we call them, and/or queens during the springtime. But again, most people make the majority of their income from honey production. There are very few beekeepers in our state involved in migratory pollination, like to almonds, but we do have some beekeepers who are involved in pollination of plants like blueberries in the southern part of the state. I don't know how much money they make. I still think those beekeepers, most of their income comes from honey. Now, the reason I bring honey up is because in our state and many other southern states, one of the major honey plants is actually Chinese tallow tree. And this plant is considered an invasive weed. It's been around since Ben Franklin's time, and you can see it's really inundated the southeast, and now it's kind of spread to other places as well. What's interesting is I've asked commercial beekeepers to sort of give me a ballpark figure of what they think most of their annual income comes from this plant, and they estimate about 50% of their annual income. Now, you talk to beekeepers in Louisiana, in Houston, Texas, and that number jumps to 90% of their income comes from this plant. So you can see that if this plant was to disappear overnight, our commercial beekeepers would be hurting a lot. And so they're kind of resistant to a potential, I'll show you in a minute, there's a discussion about introducing biocontrol agents to control this plant. The tension is that this plant is so invasive that it's disrupting natural systems, and wildlife biologists and ecologists consider it extremely destructive. And even other commodity groups, like other farm groups, people who have pasture lands are constantly battling this plant as it invades their grasslands that they're trying to graze cattle on, and so forth. Now, there are different herbicides that are approved for use and other chemical methods for eliminating the trees, and those methods have mixed efficacy depending on the terrain and situation. And as I've mentioned, there's been some research on the utilization of two biocontrol agents. One's a flea beetle and the other one's a noctuid moth, and these are both from China, which of course is the natural range of the Chinese tallow tree itself. In the case of the beetle, both the adult and the larvae feed on the plant. The adults feed mainly on the Chinese tallow leaves, and the immature beetle grubs actually they develop in the soil, and they actually nibble on the seedling roots and do damage that way and can kill seedlings that way. Of course, with the moth, most of the damage comes from the caterpillars feeding on the foliage of the trees. And there's been a research group in Florida, USDA-ARS, who had been looking at the potential of using these two biocontrol agents in the control of this plant. They've had some success in their laboratory studies, and I guess there was some just the awareness in China that these plants are pretty good at controlling tallow in China, led to the idea that they would import them and use them and release these biocontrol agents in the southeast to help try and control tallow trees. This proposal's been up in the air. I think I started hearing about it in 2017, late 2017 or early 2018, and now it's come to a point where APHIS, the Animal Plant Health Inspection Service, is trying to decide if they're going to approve this release and this use of these biocontrol agents. And whenever they do this, they offer an input period where stakeholders, people who have interest in what might happen when such an action is taken, can provide their input. And what I want to point out is that there's a deadline of February 22nd for you to be able to provide your input. And there's a link you would go to, and you can say one way or the other, and whether or not you're for the release or against the release, and give your reasons. And what APHIS will do is they will try and synthesize the different comments, and it will be basically the summary of what the collective thoughts of people will be used in the decision-making process. So if you're a beekeeper who feels threatened by this release, you might want to provide input. I think if I were going to complain, I mean, it's such a weird tension. Tallow does a lot of destructive things. I think the strongest argument that I've heard from some beekeepers against this release of biocontrol agents is the fear that these agents may have a host shift to more of our native plants. They're supposed to be specific to Chinese tallow tree, but when they're released, what is the possibility that they might shift to something like honey locust or some other plant that we don't want destroyed by an exotic pest? So I think that's a strong statement. I don't know what the risks are myself, but I'm just giving you some ideas that I've heard from beekeepers. Whatever stance and whatever input you want to provide, you have to do it by February 22nd. All right, you know that whenever I talk to beekeepers, I can't help myself. I have to mention that Varroa mites are still your biggest issue, and that no matter how you're going to manage it, you have to manage it. You can't just let it stand alone. And so most of you know that there's sort of two big approaches to controlling mites. One is the use of chemicals integrated with other methods, and then natural beekeeping and some other forms of natural beekeeping, or sort of an organic beekeeping where they don't want to use chemicals at all in the hive. Instead, they keep colonies small and do things more naturally to try and manage the mite populations that way. I bring it up because one of our hardest or most difficult times for Varroa control is during the time when we're making our main honey production, which is spring honey, May, June, July. One of the problems is it's warm then, and we have very limited number of chemicals that can be used because some of them are temperature dependent. In fact, the only chemical that's legally allowed to be used right now during the time when honey is being made in the colony is the use of formic acid. And it's very heat sensitive, and in warmer temperatures it's more dangerous to our bees. So EPA is considering, and they ought to have a decision by the end of February, I think is what I'm hearing, on whether or not oxalic acid vaporization in particular can be used during the honey flow. And they're leaning toward allowing it because it's as safe as formic acid in terms of a residue in honey. It's a natural food residue already in honey, and so they consider the risk in terms of human safety of this material being harmful in honey is very minimal. So I think they're leaning toward that now. It's not legal yet, so I will announce to all the beekeeping organizations, the Gulf Coast Beekeepers Association and that kind of thing, as soon as I know when it's legal, and give you the details on what they say. I know this, that they're going to be really stringent on insisting on, during oxalic acid vaporization, that you wear the proper respirator, and these respirators need to have the right cartridges for absorbing acids and so forth. Now, how they're going to enforce it, I don't know, but they're strict, and this is something I've been kind of fussing the beekeepers about. A lot of times the way beekeepers handle oxalic acid vaporization is they sort of wet their finger, hold it up, see which way the wind's blowing, and then just stand to the other side without wearing any protection at all, and that's just not wise. Please consider, and this is a good link to go to look to review the use of respirators of this kind. Now, one of the things EPA recognizes is that you already have, when you're working with bees, you already have a lot around your face. So they were going to the half mask respirator because they felt like it would fit better inside a bee veil. So, you know, they're thinking like a beekeeper in some ways. So anyway, I just want to emphasize, do it safely if you're going to do it. But again, it's not legal yet during honey production. Normally we vaporize with oxalic acid during the fall when there's no brood in the colony, and certainly that's when it's most effective. Let's see. Oh, this is some other good news. Some researchers were wondering, you know, there's some products that already exist out there, insecticides and so forth, that are being used for other mites in agriculture. And what they wanted to do was just test those formulated products and these active ingredients that are already used against mites on both. They did acute toxicity testing on bees and mites for all mites just to try and find candidate compounds that might be pretty good. They found 5 compounds that basically killed mites at very high levels. But unfortunately, 3 of those also killed bees, a significantly high number of honeybees at high levels, and so they consider those as not very likely candidates. However, they did find 2 candidates that had both a high mortality toward mites and a very low mortality toward bees, and so they consider those as potential for developing new miticides. So that's pretty good news, because those people who do use chemistry to control mites know that our arsenal is very limited, and the more chemicals we have in our arsenal, the better. And I can tell you that these 2 compounds, I'm not going to tell you what they are, but their modes of actions are different than anything that we're already using. So that means there won't be much resistance to these 2 compounds if they are developed and released as miticides for our use in bee colonies. So that's good news that researchers are looking for new ways of chemical control of the mites for those people who rely on chemicals. In terms of MSU Apiculture Activities last year, was all just pretty much a bust for all our big meetings. Most of our workshops and seminars and our basically large events, you know, for example, the Central Mississippi Beekeepers, you know, the spring workshops, usually over 100 people. So we just had to cancel all those events, including our annual convention, the Mississippi Beekeepers Association. So we're all out of whack. I did get pretty good at doing Zoom meetings, but unfortunately, a lot of the clubs, the beekeeping clubs, just didn't really seem to want to go that route. I think since COVID is still a major problem, that we probably should, for the springtime into the summer, considering trying to do more Zoom interactions or webinar type meetings. And I certainly would be willing to do some with the coastal people. So just keep that in mind. We did recently submit 2 publications that will be coming out soon. They both kind of address first-year beekeeping. One is kind of a shorter document, the First Year Beekeeping, a seasonal guide for North Mississippi. So it doesn't necessarily apply to coastal areas. But I also wrote this one, Beginning Beekeeping and Growing New Colonies, Mississippi, that's more general for the entire state. And it basically discusses, you know, the proper introduction of nuclei colony and feeding them and so forth. I will say our research with bees in the field was pretty limited, because when we do the bee research, we need field crews that are standing, you know, inches apart from one another working in hives, so that was kind of diminished quite a bit this year. However, our small hive beetle research, which is more of an indoor research activity, kind of was steady. And so this is Audrey Sheridan's research. And in fact, we have a new system in that lower right. We've got an olfactory, basically a choice testing system where we can pump different volatiles in to see what chemicals attract beetles. And of course, her idea is try to identify chemicals that attract beetles so that traps can be made. But we were also looking at some of the effects of insecticides that are used in soil, for example, on the reproductive tract of both male and female beetles and how they mate. And the reason the research was able to continue is we have a laboratory colony. If you look over there in the lower left, we can raise the small hive beetles in soil within these incubators, and we've had the colony going pretty much steady for the last couple of years, so it allows us to continue doing research in the lab like this. So at least that part of our research has been a lot more steady than the field work with bees. And that's all I really have to say. Again, I want to emphasize that I'm very open to input and questions that you may have, or statements about what you would like us to do for you in the future. You can reach me via email there, and I use my personal cell phone. I was kind of gone crazy a little bit. I had 4 phones, and I was just kind of nuts trying to have a work desk phone, a work service phone, an office phone in the main office, and I just decided I'm going to use my personal cell phone for everything. So that's why I give you this cell phone number. Feel free to call that number if you need me as well. And again, I hope to see you face to face next year when we have this meeting again. Take good care. Thank you.